7:38 Hudson Valley Focus Live on this first full day of spring. Let me welcome to Hudson Valley Focus Live Mark Meckler, President, co-founder, Convention of States Action, largest nationwide movement seeking to call the first ever Article 5 Convention of States. And good morning, Mark. Thank you for joining us on Hudson Valley Focus Live.
Good morning. Excellent to be with you.
I'm glad you're here. And Mark, there are some key issues that we're going to talk about, and the amendments that the Convention of States looking to advance, if we can go forward. One of those issues is term limits for members of Congress. I found a 30-second clip of former Congressman John Conyers, who served in Congress for 52 years. And I will acknowledge that, John was a Korean War veteran, one of the, early pioneers of the civil rights movement, a distinguished record early on for sure. But I think this 30-second clip illustrates part of the reason why we need term limits for members of Congress. So, Uncle Mike, if you've got that, let's hear from John Conyers.
During his speech at a National Press Club luncheon, the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, Democratic Congressman John Conyers, questioned the point of lawmakers reading the health care bill.
I love these members that get up and say, read the bill. What good is reading the bill if it's 1,000 pages and you don't have 2 days and 2 lawyers to find out what it means after you read the bill?
Mark, life-changing legislation, and a leader in Congress for more than 50 years says, why do we bother to read the bills? Mark Meckler?
Yeah, obviously that's outrageous. There's nobody in the American public that would hear that and not think that that's disgusting and outrageous. But I have to say, in his defense, he actually has a point. Why do we even have 1,000-page bills that these guys can't possibly read? The reality is they can't possibly read them in the way we do it. We not only need term limits, but we need to prevent 1,000-page bills.
Yes. Excellent point. Excellent point. And the problem, Mark Meckler, is that there are large percentage of the population across this great country of ours who I think have little understanding of how legislation is written and formulated and moves through committees and all of the special interests that are influencing that. Can you speak to that, please?
Yeah, I think that is correct. I think largely people have become disconnected from the federal government, and that's because they want you to be disconnected from the federal government. They don't want you to understand how this stuff works. Our education system, kind of switching subjects here, doesn't teach this stuff anymore.
Yes.
But probably when you and I were kids, we learned some of this stuff from Sesame Street, literally how a bill moves. They don't play stuff like that anymore. The population is being intentionally dumbed down so that we don't understand the process. But in reality, it's not that complicated if you pay attention.
That is correct. And I saw an article sometime back that the members of Congress themselves, I forget how many years it's been since they've actually written legislation. They become very dependent on the lobbyists for various organizations to actually write the legislation, and then it's passed to the heads of the various committees, heads of the House of Representatives and the Senate. And then largely these members, and you will know more than I do, members, then go along with what their party leadership tells them. Mark, is that, are these folks truly then our representatives if that's the process?
No, they're not. And I think we broke representative government a long time ago. As you say, one problem is that they were never intended to serve for 30 or 50 years.
Yes.
They were supposed to live in their district, go to Congress, and then come back. Nobody wanted to stay. It wasn't considered an honor to stay there for decades. So that's number one. Number two, and I think this is really important, Congress was never supposed to be as important as it has become. It has invaded every area of our life. There were 17 original enumerated powers for the federal government. Now there are literally infinite powers of the federal government, thanks to the federal courts giving them all this power. So the problem is the power is concentrated in D.C. It was supposed to be in the representatives close to the people in their state legislatures.
And complicating that further, Congress itself has created any number of alphabet agencies over the decades, and then basically walked away is what it looks like from my perspective. And we have unelected individuals in these alphabet agencies, nameless, faceless bureaucrats who then write tens of thousands of pages of rules and regulations, often in conflict with other other areas of government, whether it's at the federal or state level. Mark?
Yeah, I think you're pointing at one of the most fundamental problems we have, which is what I believe is the largely unconstitutional administrative state. And what you have is often Congress now passing something called enabling legislation, where it says the secretary shall regulate this particular area and shall have all power and authority to do so. And then the regulations, which are actually laws, get written by these agencies. They're not only unelected, they're unaccountable. In other words, we have no right to fire them, to discipline them, to judge their performance. That's Congress's job, and Congress has largely abdicated that job because it's much easier for them.
Yes, lazy, and over the years that I've had an opportunity to interact with some of these individuals, the lack of understanding, and of course then they'll come back later on and say, and this happened with the passage of the Affordable Care Act, otherwise known as Obamacare, unintended consequences, or as we say here on Hudson Valley Focus Live, collateral damage. And then they just walk away and throw their hands up. Much of this, Mark Meckler, is foreseeable, I should say, provided people actually have the honest conversation and turn these issues and look at them from multiple perspectives and how they will impact the populations across the country. Mark?
Yeah, and I wish it was just laziness. Honestly, what it is they like turning this power over to the agencies because then they, meaning Congress, are actually unaccountable. They can point the finger at the agency and say, well, this isn't our fault, and we can help you fix it. We can help you navigate it. The only way I know to fix this, Tom, literally, is to call a convention of states, which is what we're doing, and remove the power from the federal government to do these things. We can actually tell them, no, you can't be involved in health care. No, you can't be involved in education. No, you can't be involved in energy or the environment. This is something the American people have at their disposal. It's available in Article 5 of the Constitution, and that's what we're doing.
So, Mark Meckler, you're here today to discuss the Convention of States. If you can outline that for us, please, in terms of, what is it, how is it enacted, what's asking to be done, and what can our listeners do, particularly here in the state of New York, to advance this initiative?
Well, we have a great grassroots team there in New York working on it, and you can find them at conventionofstates.com. But the way it works is, in Article 5 of the Constitution, the founders gave us the power to amend our Constitution if we thought it was necessary. They told us it would be necessary. They said the federal government would become a tyranny. So in the second clause, they said when two-thirds of the states ask for a convention of states, the states can gather in convention and they can propose amendments to restrain federal tyranny. So what we're asking for is a convention to talk about term limits, as you started with, not just on Congress, but on these administrative agencies, too, on staffers and bureaucrats, what we know as the deep state. Number two, to have amendments that would impose fiscal restraints on the federal government, like a balanced budget amendment, caps on tax and spending. They're spending us into oblivion right now. And number three, anything that would impose scope, jurisdiction, or power restraints on the federal government. I talked about that a little bit when we said education, energy, healthcare. These are things the federal government was never meant to be involved in. And so that's what we're pushing for. It takes 34 states to call a convention, two-thirds of the states. This year we've passed the halfway mark. In fact, we got Wisconsin, Nebraska, and West Virginia just in the last month or so. I expect South Carolina here in the next couple of weeks. That'll take us to state number 19 on our way to 34.
Excellent. And to the point that you made about the overreach of these alphabet agencies, during COVID, we had, was it HUD or the CDC or NIH that, enacted the eviction moratorium and the fact that I think on 2 occasions that the Supreme Court finally ruled the fact that they had no authority to do that. I mean, that's, in my mind, an example of the kinds of overreach and abuse that we have seen from our federal government, Mark.
Yeah, we're seeing that from every single agency. These agencies, frankly, I think the agencies, generally speaking, are unconstitutional because Congress doesn't have the authority to delegate lawmaking authority. That's for Congress only.
Yes.
But this is what they do. These agencies, once they begin, they never die, and they reach deeper and deeper into every aspect of American lives. And if we're going to regulate that stuff, it was always meant to be done at the state level because the state legislatures are closer to the people. They know what the people are going through.
You know, when I listen to what you're saying, Mark Meckler, I think about it. It is called the House of Representatives, and we just have lost our focus on that. And sadly, the divisions in this country with Republican, Democrat, young, old, rich, poor, gay, straight, pro-life, pro-abortion, those are deliberately, I believe, being weaponized to divide we the people into our tribes so that we war with each other. And we've diverted our attention away from those individuals who swear an oath to represent we the people. Mark?
Yeah, look, I think you nailed it. That's about as wise a thing as you could possibly say. That's a true, clear vision of our system. In other words, we don't have a representative system anymore, and they do intentionally cause us to war against each other and tribalize. And part of that is because so much power is centered in the federal government that everything that happens in Washington, D.C. becomes important. It used to be, in the way the country was founded, that not that much happened in Washington, D.C., and we're a lot more alike in New York State than we are in the whole nation. And New York State is very different than Texas, which is different than Oklahoma. And so this is important. We were intended to be a federal system, which meant most of the authority was left in the states. The cultures are different. The populations are different. The geography is different. I wouldn't say we're homogenous, but we're much more similar in our needs and interests at the state level. That's why the power is supposed to be there. We would have a lot less fighting if it was that way.
I think you're absolutely correct. And the one thing that came to mind listening to what you were saying, Mark Meckler, is the secure borders issue. That's supposed to be the role of the federal government. They have openly abdicated their constitutional responsibility, and there are states that are trying to enact it on their own, but that's not how we're done. So let me ask you a question. We have about 5 or 6 minutes left, Mark Meckler, and of course it is conventionofstates.com, if I'm correct. And the in terms of term limits, has there been discussion about what limits on these, members of the U.S. Senate and House of Representatives should be?
Yeah, I mean, we don't make specific proposals, but I can tell you we did what we called a simulated convention back in 2016. We gathered representatives from all over the country. They got together in convention. They debated these things. This is one of the most difficult things for lawmakers to impose upon themselves or to think about imposing, because they like to serve long terms. Also, there is an argument for, well, they need to be there a certain amount of time to know the system, to understand how everything works. So the question is, how long? And I've seen everything proposed from 2 terms in the Senate, which is 12 years, 3 terms in the House, which is 6 years. If somebody was able to go back and forth and do that from the House to the Senate or Senate to House, that could be 18 years total in the federal government. I've seen debates pro and con for longer and shorter. So I think that's up in the air until we get to convention.
Yes, and that's a number of years ago. I was at a conference, and there was an individual. I'm going to say he was there from Pakistan, and said, before you ask about term limits, make sure you understand what you're asking for. We have term limits in my country, and too many of our elected officials get in and know they need to score big in their few short years there. So it's there are the pros and cons, but that's something. I mean, my personal preference would be, something along the House of Representatives. A 2-year stint is just too short. They're always running for re-election. I mean, if we had something like, 4 or 5 3-year terms, it would give us that continuity we're looking for. And, but those are things to be addressed. What's the take as far as a balanced budget, some form of a balanced budget amendment, Mark Meckler?
Yeah, I think this is really critical. We all know we have to balance our own budget. You can't just keep borrowing. Ultimately, you declare bankruptcy. Countries are actually, in the end, no different than that. They have the ability to print money. Individuals don't. That's a big distinction between them and states as well. But eventually, that money is useless. And we're moving towards that time. We're $30 trillion in debt. If you count long-term liabilities, that's now over $150 trillion in debt. That's unsustainable. Ultimately, we're seeing threats of the Chinese to make the yuan the international currency of trading. So we're going to have to figure out how to balance our budget. The politicians will never make hard decisions unless you put them in a box where they're forced to. And the only way to do that is to impose some form of balanced budget amendment.
I look at this and think about future generations, and we've spoken many times on Hudson Valley Focus Live about the greatest generation and the rights and freedoms that were fought for during World War II. And I look at what we've done since to future generations, both in terms of loss of rights and freedoms, but as well as the economic shackles that are being imposed on them. And our founders said that it was absolutely unjust to do this to future generations, to indebt future generations. And yet that's exactly what I see us doing, Mark.
Yeah, you go back to our founding, and the founders and the framers actually used the word immoral, that it was immoral to impose debt on future generations. In other words, you and I, we spend money, and then our kids have that debt. In fact, we know it's considered so immoral in our society that debt doesn't pass down from generation to generation in families. You're not allowed to do that. And so now we do that as a country. We pass down that debt. It is immoral, and we're either going to bankrupt the country, or we're definitely going to lower the standard of living of our kids, grandkids, and so on. That is absolutely immoral.
I, however, place economy among the first and most important Republican virtues, and public debt as the greatest dangers to be feared. To preserve our independence, we must not let our rulers load us with perpetual debt. I am for a government rigorously frugal and simple, said Thomas Jefferson, and as well as others. And Mark, your closing thoughts here on Hudson Valley Focus Live as to how folks can support you and why it is so critically important that we do so.
Yeah, I think this is really important for folks in New York to understand. Sometimes people will tell me, oh, it's so partisan, we can't possibly get it done. And the answer is we can get it done in any state. We have bipartisan support in a lot of states across the country right now, including West Virginia, where we just passed. Folks need to get involved by going to conventionofstates.com, sign the petition. That'll go to your state legislator, and then click the Take Action tab and volunteer. You're going to find a family of like-minded people involved in a lot of issues. It's not just the convention. It's school choice. It's pro-life. It's pro-Second Amendment. It's whatever your local team wants to be involved in. We'll give you the resources to be involved at conventionofstates.com.
Listening to what you were just saying, Mark Meckler, I'm reminded that we are a not a democracy, but rather a representative republic, and it's the incumbent on all of us to see that our individual rights and freedoms are protected, but also to understand that and stand up for the rights and freedoms of others now and well into the future.
Agreed, Tom, and I appreciate it. It takes guys like you who are on the airwaves every single day, reminding people of that, introducing them to ways they can fight, educating them about what's going on. So I really appreciate your service there, being on the airwaves every day.
You're quite welcome. I'm glad you're able to take time out of a busy schedule to be with us. And this is something that, working with the state representatives here in New York and at your national level, we will continue this conversation from here going forward with, on a regular basis. Mark?
Thanks, Tom. God bless you.
Thank you. 7:57 on Hudson Valley Focus Live. Mark Meckler, co-founder, Convention of States and President, Convention of States, conventionofstates.com. Please visit their webpage now and sign up. See full petition here. Just put in your first name, last name, email, address, whether or not you are a U.S. veteran. And let's really work on this, because I think it's quite clear at this point in time that our representatives have forgotten just who it is they are supposed to represent. Back in a minute on Hudson Valley Focus Live on WKIP.
I'm here live in Philadelphia at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. When you hear the phrase lives, fortunes, and sacred honor, these are the folks we should think of, those who anonymously gave their lives. Well, today you have a chance to volunteer. You need to volunteer for conventionofstates.com, the movement that's going to save the country. These folks are willing to step up and give everything. We need you to give just a little bit. Go to conventionofstates.com and volunteer today.